Deadly Deception. Unveiling the illusion behind Darius Magnus murder. A crime thriller story. In the opulent world of illusion and deception, a renowned magician's death reveals a dark and intricate plot. As Detective Marcus Hale delves into the mystery of Darius Magnus' final performance, he uncovers a web of treachery and deceit that threatens to shatter everything he thought he knew. Join us on a gripping journey through a labyrinth of lies and betrayal, where the line between reality and illusion is perilously thin. The evening air buzzed with excitement outside the Grand Marquis Theater. The line of spectators stretched down the block, eagerly waiting to see the performance of Darius Magnus, the world-renowned illusionist who had become a household name. Inside, the crimson velvet seats quickly filled as murmurs of anticipation swelled among the audience. The stage was set, draped in curtains of deep purple, casting an air of mystery over the entire theater. Darius stood backstage, running through his final mental checklist. He wore his trademark black tailcoat, and his dark eyes gleamed with the thrill of the evening ahead. Despite years in the spotlight, there was always a small flicker of nerves before each performance. But tonight was different. Tonight he was preparing to perform his most dangerous illusion yet. "Ready?" Elena Vance, his assistant, asked as she adjusted his cuffs. Her calm demeanor helped to soothe the last remnants of his anxiety. Elena had been with Darius for years, her loyalty unquestionable. She was the only one who truly understood his dedication to his craft. "As always," Darius replied with a wink. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "This will be the performance of a lifetime." The lights dimmed and the audience fell silent. The sound of a slow, steady drumbeat filled the theater as the curtains drew back. The spotlight centered on Darius as he made his grand entrance, his figure sharp against the dark stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Darius' voice resonated through the theater, "prepare yourselves for an experience like no other. Tonight, you will witness the impossible." The crowd erupted in applause, eager to see the master at work. The opening acts were flawless. Darius moved effortlessly from one trick to the next, disappearing doves, levitating objects, mind-bending sleight of hand. But the main event was yet to come, the phantom escape, an illusion Darius had spent months perfecting. For this trick, Darius would be locked inside a steel coffin-like box, chained from head to toe and submerged in water. The box would then be raised high above the stage. He had precisely 3 minutes to escape before the box plunged back into the tank. The tension in the theater was palpable as the crew secured Darius inside the box, while Elena fastened the final chain around his wrists. As the steel door slammed shut, a sense of unease swept through Elena. She had been by Darius' side for years, but tonight something felt off. She shook the thought away, focusing on her role. She had to trust that Darius knew what he was doing. The box was lifted above the stage, swaying slightly as the audience held their breath. The seconds ticked by. Darius' usual flair for the dramatic meant the escape was always left until the last possible moment, but as the clock neared 3 minutes, the crowd began to murmur nervously. Elena's heart raced. Suddenly there was a sharp crack, a noise that wasn't part of the performance. The box trembled violently before crashing back down into the water tank with a deafening splash. Panic spread through the theater as Elena rushed to the tank, signaling the crew to lower it quickly. She reached for the latch, her hands trembling as she pulled the door open. Darius lay motionless inside, the chain still wrapped tightly around his body. His eyes were closed, his face pale and lifeless. Elena screamed for help as the audience stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Medics rushed to the stage, but it was too late. Darius Magnus was dead. The cold morning air did little to wake Detective Marcus Hale from the sleepless night he had endured. He stood outside the Grand Marquis Theater, sipping coffee from a paper cup as the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the surrounding area. The crime scene was still active, officers moving in and out of the building as the investigation got underway. Marcus wasn't a stranger to the strange and bizarre. He had seen his fair share of cases that defied simple explanations. But this one was different. Darius Magnus, the illusionist who had captivated millions, was dead in front of a live audience, and something didn't add up. Elena Vance stood near the entrance, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked lost, clutching the edge of her coat as if to steady herself. Marcus approached her gently, pulling out his notepad. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Vance," Marcus said, his voice measured. "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions." Elena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand what happened. Everything was going perfectly. This wasn't supposed to happen." Marcus jotted down notes. "How long have you worked with Mr. Magnus?" 7 years, she replied. "We've done this illusion before dozens of times. He was always so careful with the preparations." "Was there anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" Marcus asked. "Anything out of the ordinary in the days leading up to the performance?" Elena hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "He had been receiving threatening letters for a few months now. We thought it was just some crazed fan, but maybe we were wrong." "Do you still have those letters?" Marcus asked. "They should be in his office," Elena said. "I can show you." Marcus nodded, signaling to one of the officers to secure the letters as evidence. As they entered the theater, Marcus surveyed the backstage area. The setup seemed straightforward, but something gnawed at him. The chains that bound Darius should have been easily escapable, and yet they had remained intact. And the timing, the way the box had fallen, seemed too coincidental to be a simple malfunction. Did Darius have any rivals? Marcus asked as they reached the office. Elena's expression darkened. "Vincent Kane," she replied, almost spitting out the name. They had been at each other's throats for years, always trying to outdo one another. Vincent Kane, Marcus thought. He had heard the name before, another big player in the world of illusionists, known for his darker, edgier performances. If there was anyone who might have had a motive to sabotage Darius' show, it could be him. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialing his partner to run a background check on Kane. As he hung up, Elena unlocked Darius' office door and handed over the letters. They were threatening, no doubt, but vague. Still, Marcus knew they couldn't be dismissed. As he left the theater, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and each one pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. Someone had murdered Darius Magnus, and they had done it in front of hundreds of people without leaving a trace. The game was on. Detective Marcus Hale sifted through the pile of letters in Darius' office, his brow furrowed in concentration. Each letter carried the same threatening tone, but none offered any concrete leads. He placed them back in a plastic evidence bag and leaned back in the chair. Something wasn't sitting right with him. There had to be more. The phone on his desk buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his partner, Officer Jenkins. "Marcus, I pulled up some background on Vincent Kane. The guy's got a long history with Darius, all right. They were competitors for years, but it got heated when Darius won that Illusionist of the Year award 3 years ago. Kane went ballistic." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I figured as much. Anything else?" "Well, Kane's alibi checks out for the night of the incident," Jenkins said. "He was performing at another venue across town. It was live-streamed, so he couldn't have been at the Grand Marquis." Marcus gritted his teeth. Kane had been his prime suspect, but if he had a solid alibi, it meant the investigation would have to pivot in another direction. "Thanks, Jenkins," Marcus muttered before hanging up. He turned his attention to Elena Vance, who was sitting across from him, her eyes distant. "Elena, what do you know about Darius' personal life?" Marcus asked, hoping for a new angle. She hesitated. Darius wasn't one to open up much. He was always focused on the next performance, the next big act. But recently, well, there was something that happened. Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." "His sister, Clarissa, reappeared in his life after years of being estranged," Elena said softly. She showed up about 6 months ago out of nowhere. Darius was hesitant at first, but they started to rebuild their relationship. I don't know all the details, but he seemed different after that. Different how? Marcus pressed. More cautious, almost paranoid, Elena replied. He started locking things away even in his own office. And he was adamant about no one touching certain props, especially those from his earlier performances. Do you know why they were estranged? Marcus asked. I don't. He never talked about it and I never asked, Elena said. Marcus made a mental note to look into Clarissa's background. She was a loose end in this tangled web, and he had a gut feeling she might be the key to unraveling it. That afternoon, Marcus tracked down Clarissa Magnus. She lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, far removed from the glamorous life her brother had led. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in recognition. I was expecting this, Clarissa said, her voice calm but guarded. Come in. Marcus stepped inside the sparsely furnished apartment, taking a seat on the worn couch. Clarissa sat across from him, her posture stiff. Clarissa, I need to know more about your relationship with Darius, Marcus began. Why were you estranged? She took a deep breath, her eyes glazing over as if she were revisiting old memories. Darius and I had a falling out years ago. It was over our parents' inheritance. Darius inherited the family estate while I was left with almost nothing. It drove a wedge between us. But when I came back into his life, it wasn't for money. I wanted to reconcile. Marcus studied her face, searching for any signs of deceit. Did anyone know about your inheritance dispute? Did you ever talk about it? Only Darius and I knew the full details, Clarissa said firmly. But I assure you I didn't come back for revenge. We were starting to rebuild our relationship. As much as Marcus wanted to believe her, something about Clarissa's sudden reappearance in Darius' life felt too convenient. He thanked her for her time and left, but she remained on his mind as the investigation progressed. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the theater. He found Elena pacing backstage, her nerves frayed. She had been distant since Darius' death, her demeanor shifting from composed to anxious. Elena, I need to see the props Darius was so protective of, Marcus said. She hesitated but eventually led him to a storage room hidden behind a heavy curtain. Inside, old performance equipment was stacked neatly. Smoke machines, escape props, and various crates containing Darius' past illusions. Anything specific? Elena asked. Marcus' eyes scanned the room until they landed on a crate marked The Vanishing Door. It was a prop from one of Darius' earlier acts, an old favorite of his. Marcus opened the crate and pulled out the door frame, inspecting it closely. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but as Marcus ran his hands along the edges, he found a hidden compartment embedded within the frame. He pried it open and discovered a small, folded piece of paper inside. He carefully unfolded the paper. It contained a list of names Marcus recognized as members of Darius' team, past and present. Next to each name was a number, and at the bottom of the list was a symbol Marcus had seen before, the emblem of an underground network tied to illegal gambling and extortion. Marcus' blood ran cold. Darius had been involved in something far darker than stage illusions. And someone close to him might have wanted him dead to keep that secret buried. The next morning, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the list he had discovered in Darius' hidden compartment. The names and numbers hinted at debts, favors owed, and possibly blackmail. His mind raced with possibilities. Could Darius have been using his influence to control people within his circle, or was he being coerced himself? Marcus needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. He called in Samuel Carrick, Darius' former protege, for questioning. Samuel had parted ways with Darius years ago after a very public falling out, and Marcus wanted to know if any old wounds had festered into something darker. Samuel arrived at the station, his face drawn and tense. He had been avoiding the spotlight ever since Darius' death, keeping to himself and refusing media interviews. "Samuel, thank you for coming in," Marcus greeted him as they sat down in an interrogation room. "I understand this must be difficult, but I need to ask you some tough questions." Samuel nodded stiffly. "I'll do what I can." Marcus slid the list across the table. "I found this among Darius' things. Your name is on it, along with several others. Care to explain?" Samuel's face paled as he glanced at the paper. I don't know what this is. I swear." "Don't lie to me, Samuel," Marcus pressed. "Your relationship with Darius was rocky at best. You had a public fallout. Did you owe him something? Did he have something on you?" Samuel's hands shook slightly as he stared at the list. "It wasn't like that," he said quietly. "Yes, we had our differences, but Darius helped me when I was starting out. I owed him a lot of money from a failed investment, but I paid him back. This list, whatever it is, it's not about that." "Then what is it about?" Marcus asked, his voice low and insistent. Samuel hesitated. "Darius was involved with some dangerous people. People who financed his shows in exchange for favors. I don't know all the details, but I got out before it got worse. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. He thought he could handle it on his own." Marcus leaned back, his mind reeling. Darius had been playing with fire, and it had cost him his life. But who had pulled the trigger? As Marcus pieced together the puzzle, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elena knew more than she was letting on. Her behavior had been increasingly erratic, and she had avoided discussing her role in Darius' life beyond the surface. He decided it was time for a more direct approach. That afternoon, Marcus found Elena pacing in front of the theater, her eyes darting nervously. "We need to talk," he said firmly. Elena looked startled but nodded. "Tell me about your relationship with Darius," Marcus demanded. "The truth this time." Elena looked away, her hands trembling. "I loved him," she admitted softly. "But he didn't love me back. Not in the way I wanted. I tried to protect him from the people who were after him, but he wouldn't listen. He thought he was invincible." Marcus studied her closely. "Were you involved in his death?" Her eyes widened in horror. "No. I would never hurt him," she insisted. "But I knew something bad was coming. I just didn't know when." "Then tell me who did this," Marcus pressed. Elena hesitated, then whispered, "Clarissa. She had more to gain from his death than anyone. She's the one you should be looking at." Marcus nodded, filing away the information. Whether Elena was telling the truth or deflecting suspicion, one thing was clear. This case was far from over, and the answers lay in the shadows of Darius Magnus' carefully crafted world of illusions. Detective Marcus Hale couldn't shake Elena's words from his mind. Clarissa had more to gain from Darius' death than anyone. But was it really that simple? Clarissa's reappearance in Darius' life had been sudden, and while her motives were suspect, she didn't strike Marcus as a cold-blooded killer. Still, Elena's accusation couldn't be ignored. As Marcus sat in his office that evening, staring at the list of names and the hidden dealings in Darius' life, he knew he was missing something. The list, the network of debts, the dangerous people, it all pointed to a larger conspiracy. Darius hadn't just been involved in magic. He had been entangled in something far more sinister. He dialed Officer Jenkins again, determined to dig deeper into Clarissa's past. "I need you to do a full financial background check on Clarissa Magnus," Marcus said. "Find out if there's anything suspicious, debts, sudden inflows of cash, anything that might suggest she was motivated by something other than family ties." Jenkins agreed and set to work, but Marcus couldn't sit still. He grabbed his coat and decided to pay another visit to the Grand Marquis Theater. Something about that place felt like the key to unraveling the mystery. He arrived just as the evening shadows lengthened across the street. The theater was dark and empty now, the spectacle of Darius' final performance haunting the silent corridors. Inside, Marcus made his way backstage, his eyes scanning every corner. He found Elena sitting in one of the dressing rooms, staring into the mirror, lost in thought. "Elena," Marcus said gently, stepping into the room, "I need you to walk me through that night again. From the moment you arrived to the moment Darius didn't make it. Elena blinked, slowly coming back to reality. She looked exhausted. I've told you everything I know, she said softly. We rehearsed like usual. Darius seemed focused, maybe a bit more tense than usual, but nothing out of the ordinary. Focus on the details, Marcus pressed. Was there anything off about the equipment? The setup? Anyone backstage who didn't belong? Elena shook her head, but then paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. Wait, there was something odd. The night before the performance, Vincent Kane showed up. He and Darius had a heated argument backstage. I wasn't there for the whole thing, but it was about the phantom escape. Kane accused Darius of stealing the trick from him. Marcus' heart skipped a beat. Kane had been Darius' rival for years, and even though his alibi checked out for the night of the performance, this new information could mean something else entirely. What else did you hear? Marcus asked, leaning forward. Elena bit her lip. Kane said something about making sure Darius' last trick would be his last, period. I didn't think much of it at the time, I just thought it was their usual rivalry. But now, Marcus' mind raced. Vincent Kane's alibi had been solid, but that didn't mean he wasn't involved. What if Kane had orchestrated the entire event, planning to sabotage Darius' performance without ever needing to be there himself? As Marcus left the dressing room, he pulled out his phone and called Jenkins again. I need you to look into Vincent Kane's staff, Marcus said urgently. See if anyone on his team has connections to Darius' crew. There's a chance someone planted the faulty equipment for him. Jenkins agreed to start digging, but as Marcus hung up, he knew time was running out. He had to confront Kane directly before the illusionist had a chance to cover his tracks. The next day, Marcus found himself standing outside Vincent Kane's lavish home. The gate was guarded by towering iron bars, and the house itself loomed ominously behind well-manicured hedges. Marcus pressed the intercom and announced himself. After a tense pause, the gate creaked open, allowing him to enter. Kane met Marcus at the door, his expression one of cool indifference. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he looked every bit the part of a wealthy illusionist, confident, charismatic, and dangerous. Detective Hale, Kane said, his voice smooth. What can I do for you today? Marcus didn't bother with pleasantries. I know about your argument with Darius the night before his death, he said bluntly. You threatened him. Said you'd make sure his last trick was his last. Kane's lips curled into a smirk. Ah yes, that was just a bit of dramatic flair, detective. Darius and I have always had a spirited rivalry. Surely you know how we illusionists love to create tension. This wasn't just flair, Marcus shot back. You were angry about the phantom escape, and now Darius is dead. You're telling me that's a coincidence? Kane shrugged, his smirk never wavering. I was performing at the same time as Darius, detective. There are hundreds of witnesses who can vouch for me. I wasn't anywhere near the Grand Marquis when he died. But that doesn't mean you didn't have someone else do your dirty work, Marcus said, narrowing his eyes. Whoever tampered with the equipment knew what they were doing. They wanted Darius dead and you had the motive. Kane's smile faltered slightly. You're grasping at straws, detective. Unless you have proof, I suggest you be careful with your accusations. Marcus clenched his fists, frustration gnawing at him. He didn't have proof, at least not yet. But he wasn't about to let Kane walk away without a fight. I'll find the proof, Marcus promised, his voice steely. And when I do, you won't be able to hide behind your illusions anymore. Kane's eyes gleamed with amusement as he stepped back, gesturing toward the door. Good luck, detective. I look forward to seeing how this little show ends. Marcus left the house, anger simmering beneath the surface. He had no doubt that Kane was involved, but the lack of concrete evidence left him at a dead end. He needed a break in the case, something to tie Kane directly to the murder. As he drove back to the station, his phone rang. It was Jenkins. I found something, Jenkins said breathlessly. One of Kane's stagehands, Eric Matthews, used to work for Darius. He was fired a year ago for sabotage. Darius caught him tampering with equipment during a rehearsal. Guess who hired him right after that? Kane. Marcus' heart raced. This was the break he needed. Matthews could be the key to proving Kane's involvement. Bring Matthews in for questioning, Marcus ordered. I want to hear what he has to say. The pieces were finally starting to come together. But as Marcus prepared for the confrontation, he couldn't shake the feeling that the final twist in this deadly game was still waiting to reveal itself. Detective Marcus Hale sat across from Eric Matthews in the small, dimly lit interrogation room. Matthews, a wiry man in his mid-30s with greasy hair and a nervous disposition, fidgeted in his seat. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding Marcus' gaze. He looked like a man who knew his time was running out. Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Eric, you're in a lot of trouble. You were working for Darius Magnus, you got fired for tampering with equipment, and then you went to work for Vincent Kane. Now Darius is dead, and I think you know more about it than you're letting on. Matthews swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I don't know anything about his death, he stammered. I swear. Don't play games with me, Marcus said sharply. I know you were at the Grand Marquis the night before Darius' final performance. You were seen backstage. What were you doing there? Matthew's face paled. I was just visiting some old friends, he stuttered. I wasn't there to hurt anyone. Then why were you caught on security footage near the equipment for the Phantom escape? Marcus pressed. You had access to everything, Eric. You could have tampered with that box. Matthew's hands trembled as he buried his face in them. I didn't mean for him to die, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. You had him. So you did tamper with the equipment, Marcus said. Who put you up to it? Was it Kane? Matthews nodded, tears streaming down his face. It was Kane, he choked out. He told me to make sure the escape went wrong, to rig the box so Darius wouldn't be able to get out in time. He said it would just scare Darius, maybe end his career. I didn't know he'd actually die. Marcus leaned back, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had suspected Kane all along, and now he had the confession to prove it. Why did you go along with it? Marcus asked, his voice softening slightly. Why did you do Kane's dirty work? Matthews wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I needed the money, he admitted. Kane promised me a big payout if I did this one job for him. I didn't think anyone would actually get hurt. Marcus sighed. But someone did get hurt, Eric. Darius is dead because of your actions, and now you're going to have to face the consequences. Matthews slumped in his chair, defeated. I didn't want any of this, he muttered. It wasn't supposed to end this way. Marcus stood up and signaled to the officer outside the door. Take him into custody, he said. He's confessed to sabotage and involuntary manslaughter. As Matthews was led away, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had cracked the case. Vincent Kane's elaborate plot to ruin Darius Magnus had spiraled out of control, leading to a deadly conclusion. Kane had thought he could manipulate the situation from the shadows, but now he would face justice for his role in the crime. Marcus returned to his office, ready to wrap up the final details of the case. But just as he sat down, his phone rang. It was Jenkins again. Marcus, you're not going to believe this, Jenkins said, his voice urgent. We just got a report from the medical examiner. There's something strange about Darius' autopsy. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? The cause of death wasn't suffocation from the botched escape, Jenkins said. Darius was poisoned. He was already dead before he entered the box. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Poisoned? The whole time he had believed the faulty equipment was the cause of Darius' death, but now the truth was even more shocking. Who had access to him before the performance? Marcus asked, his mind racing. Who could have slipped him the poison? Jenkins hesitated before answering. Elena Vance was the last person to see him alive. Marcus' heart sank. Elena had been with him every step of the investigation, but now it seemed she had been hiding the darkest secret of all. Marcus stood up, his mind buzzing with the implications. He had been so focused on Kane and Matthews that he had missed the real killer hiding in plain sight. Elena Vance had played her role well, but now the final trick was about to be revealed. Detective Marcus Hale's thoughts raced as he sped towards Elena's apartment. Poison? The discovery had shaken him. He had trusted Elena, even sympathized with her, but the autopsy report was irrefutable. Darius Magnus had been poisoned before the performance ever began, and Elena had been the last person to see him alive. He parked outside Elena's building and took a deep breath. This confrontation wouldn't be easy. Elena had been cooperative, supportive even, throughout the investigation, but now it appeared she had been playing him all along. He knocked on the door, his heartbeat quickening. Elena opened it after a few moments, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw Marcus. "Detective," she said, her voice shaky. "What's going on? Why are you here?" "We need to talk, Elena," Marcus said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "It's about Darius, and the real cause of his death." Elena's hands trembled as she closed the door behind him. "I've already told you everything I know," she said quietly, her back against the door as if she were trying to put some distance between them. Marcus didn't waste time. "You were the last person to see Darius alive," he said. "And we just got the autopsy report. He wasn't killed by the botched escape. He was poisoned, Elena." Her face went white as a sheet. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Marcus watched her closely, searching for any sign of deception. "Elena, did you poison Darius?" Marcus asked, his voice low and firm. Elena looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might confess. But then she shook her head vigorously. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I would never. I loved him, Marcus. I couldn't have done that." "Then who did?" Marcus pressed. "You were the last person with him. You were in his dressing room before the show. If it wasn't you, then who had access to him?" Elena's eyes flickered with fear, and Marcus noticed a shift in her demeanor. She wasn't just scared of him, she was scared of something or someone else. "Elena," Marcus said more gently, "if you didn't do it, then you need to tell me who did. I can protect you, but I need to know the truth." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks as she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a long moment she said nothing, her sobs the only sound in the room. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she finally spoke. "It was Clarissa," Elena said. "Clarissa poisoned him." Marcus froze, the revelation hitting him like a punch to the gut. Clarissa? Darius' long-lost sister? The one who had seemingly come back into his life after years of absence? Clarissa? Marcus repeated, trying to process the information. Why? Why would she kill her own brother? Elena wiped her tears and looked up at Marcus, her face etched with anguish. She came back into Darius' life under the pretense of reconciliation, but it was all a lie. She never forgave him for abandoning her all those years ago. She hated him, Marcus. Hated him for living the life she never had. Marcus sank into the chair across from Elena, piecing together the puzzle. Clarissa had been the perfect cover. No one had suspected her because she was Darius' family. But behind the facade of sibling reunion, she had harbored a deep-seated grudge. "When did you find out?" Marcus asked softly. "Did you know before or after the performance?" Elena shook her head. "I didn't know until afterward," she said, her voice hoarse. "Clarissa confronted me after Darius died. She told me everything, how she had slipped the poison into his tea before the show, how she had planned the whole thing. She threatened me, Marcus. She said if I told anyone, I'd be next." Marcus felt a wave of sympathy for Elena, but there was still one more question burning in his mind. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked gently. "Why did you keep this secret?" Elena looked at him with a mixture of guilt and fear. "I was scared," she admitted. "Clarissa is ruthless, detective. I didn't think anyone could stop her. And I didn't want to die. Marcus stood up, his mind made up. He had to find Clarissa and bring her to justice before she could harm anyone else. Elena, he said firmly, you're not alone in this anymore. We're going to make sure Clarissa pays for what she did. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Elena nodded, though she still looked terrified. I'll help you in any way I can, she whispered. I just want this nightmare to be over. Marcus gave her a reassuring nod and headed for the door. His next step was clear: track down Clarissa Magnus and end her deadly game. The city was quiet as Marcus drove through the streets, his mind focused on one person, Clarissa Magnus. She had eluded suspicion for so long, hiding behind the tragic tale of a broken family, but now her mask had slipped. Marcus had a sinking feeling that Clarissa wouldn't go down without a fight. He arrived at Clarissa's apartment building, a luxurious high-rise that spoke to her recent rise in wealth. Marcus had pulled the financial records Jenkins uncovered, and sure enough, there had been a significant influx of money into Clarissa's accounts shortly after Darius' death. It was blood money, no doubt part of the fortune she would inherit as Darius' only living relative. He stepped into the building and took the elevator to the top floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The elevator doors opened to reveal a grand hallway, and at the end, Clarissa's door loomed like the entrance to a lair. Marcus approached and knocked, his senses on high alert. He heard soft footsteps from within, and a moment later, the door opened. Clarissa stood before him, dressed elegantly, her face calm and composed. "Detective Hale," she said smoothly, a faint smile on her lips. "I wasn't expecting a visit from you tonight. How can I help you?" Marcus didn't return the smile. "I know what you did, Clarissa," he said bluntly. "I know you poisoned Darius." For a brief moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Clarissa's face, but she quickly recovered, her smile widening. "Poisoned?" she repeated with a soft chuckle. "That's quite an accusation, Detective. Do you have any proof?" "I have enough," Marcus said, his voice cold. "I spoke to Elena. She told me everything, how you came back into Darius' life with the intent to kill him, how you slipped the poison into his tea before his performance. And now you're going to pay for it." Clarissa's expression hardened, the mask of innocence falling away. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Detective?" she sneered. "But you have no idea what Darius put me through. He left me to fend for myself while he basked in fame and fortune. He abandoned me, and now I've taken what's rightfully mine." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You killed your own brother for revenge and money. That's not justice, Clarissa. That's murder." Clarissa stepped back, her eyes glinting with malice. "You won't be able to prove it," she hissed. "I've covered my tracks too well. And even if you try, I'll be long gone before you can do anything about it." Marcus took a step forward, his voice firm. "It's over, Clarissa. You're not going anywhere." In a flash, Clarissa darted toward the back of the apartment, grabbing something from a drawer. Marcus caught the glint of metal in her hand. She was armed. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice shaking now. The calm and composed facade had crumbled into desperation. Marcus held his hands up, trying to defuse the situation. Clarissa put the weapon down. "It's over. There's no need for this." But Clarissa was beyond reason. She lunged at Marcus, the knife aimed at his chest. In a swift move, Marcus sidestepped her attack and grabbed her wrist, twisting the knife from her hand. She screamed in rage, but Marcus held firm, pinning her against the wall. "It's over," Marcus repeated, his voice steady. "You're under arrest for the murder of Darius Magnus." Clarissa struggled for a moment longer, but the fight had gone out of her. She slumped against the wall, defeated, as Marcus cuffed her hands behind her back. As Marcus led Clarissa out of the building and into the waiting police car, he felt a sense of finality settle over him. The case was closed, and Darius Magnus' killer had been brought to justice. The deadly deception had finally come to an end. But as Marcus stood on the quiet street, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, He couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the lives that had been destroyed. Darius and Clarissa had been torn apart by greed, revenge, and tragedy, a family shattered beyond repair. In the world of magic and illusions, nothing. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Dive into our playlist of crime thrillers for more captivating stories. See you in the next story.